Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. In this video we are going to practice using regular IR verbs in the present tense in Spanish. Remember, we have three types of infinitives, so we have verbs, infinitive verbs that end in AR, ER, and IR. So this is the third one. I do have two separate videos over AR verbs and ER verbs. And the present tense itself is a very important and very powerful verb tense because when you conjugate a verb in the present tense, you can have three different meanings. So it's very useful, very versatile, and very important to know for basic communication. So remember to study the topic in your textbook, watch that grammar tutorial video. If you're joining us from outside of the class, remember that you can also Google the topic, the present tense of IR verbs in Spanish, and you'll find some YouTube videos that explain how the present tense works, and you'll get some great examples. So when you're ready to put your knowledge to the test, then come here. That's what this video is about, just helping you to apply what you've learned. Let's start with just a bit of review. There's no way around it. You have to memorize the present tense ending of regular IR verbs. They're almost identical to the present tense endings of regular ER verbs with the exception of the nosotros form. Instead of hemos, it's imos. So you should be very familiar with these endings already. The next thing is to remember the process of conjugating a verb. You start with your infinitive. You remove the IR and you find your root. And then you pick your subject and you add that ending to the root, and that's all there is to it. So the verb vivir, if I take off the IR, I know that for yo, we always use o in the present tense, so I add that and I have yo vivo. And the final thing to remember here is that when you conjugate a verb in the present tense, it can have three different meanings. So yo vivo can mean I live, I do live, or I am living, just depending on the context of your sentence. Let's get started with the practice. So how would you say I live in Oaxaca, beautiful city in Mexico? I live in Oaxaca, I do live in Oaxaca, or I am living in Oaxaca. Vivo en Oaxaca. Vivo en Oaxaca. I live in Oaxaca, I do live in Oaxaca, I am living in Oaxaca. Vivo en Oaxaca. The doctor lives in the United States. Remember, el médico is another way of saying el doctor. They both mean the same thing. So the doctor lives in the United States, the doctor does live in the United States, or the doctor is living in the United States. El médico vive en los Estados Unidos. El médico vive en los Estados Unidos. The doctor lives in the U.S., the doctor does live in the U.S., or the doctor is living in the U.S. El médico vive en los Estados Unidos. You live in California. You live in California. A statement. Tú vives en California. Tú vives en California. You live in California, you do live in California, or you are living in California. Tú vives en California. Do you live in Santo Domingo? So this would be a question. ¿Cómo se dice? Do you live in Santo Domingo? Or are you living in Santo Domingo? Vives en Santo Domingo. Vives en Santo Domingo. Do you live in Santo Domingo? Are you living in Santo Domingo? Vives en Santo Domingo. He lives in Acapulco. He lives in Acapulco. He does live in Acapulco. He is living in Acapulco. ¿Cómo se dice? Él vive en Acapulco. Él vive en Acapulco. He lives in Acapulco. He does live in Acapulco. He is living in Acapulco. Él vive en Acapulco. Ella vive en... Well, I gave you that answer, didn't I? Okay, so she lives in Bilbao. She does live in Bilbao. She is living in Bilbao. Ella vive en Bilbao. Ella vive en Bilbao. So she lives in Bilbao. She does live in Bilbao. She's living in Bilbao. City in Spain. We live in Toledo, another city in Spain. So we live in Toledo. We do live in Toledo. We are living in Toledo. Or I guess it could be the one in Ohio as well. Vivimos en Toledo. Vivimos en Toledo. We live in Toledo. We do live in Toledo. We are living in Toledo. Vivimos en Toledo. They live in Antofagasta, city in Chile. So they live in Antofagasta. They do live in Antofagasta. They are living in Antofagasta. Ellos viven en Antofagasta. Ellos viven en Antofagasta. They live in Antofagasta. They do live in Antofagasta. They are living in Antofagasta. Ellos viven en Antofagasta. Okay, so now that you're comfortable conjugating regular IR verbs in the present tense, this is just a sample of what you can now do. So for example, the verb escribir, actually any of these verbs here on the list, you can now conjugate them without a problem. So I write, escribo, he writes, él escribe, we write, escribimos. I open, abro, he opens, él abre, we open, abrimos, they open, ellos abren. Descubrir, to discover, I discover, yo descubro, he discovers, él descubre, she discovers, ella descubre. They discover, ellos descubren. Decidir, to decide, I decide, yo decido, you decide, tú decides, you decide, formal, usted decide, we decide, nosotros decidimos, and so forth and so on. So you can conjugate all of these verbs, and your ability to express yourself in Spanish has just now grown by leaps and bounds. So once you know how to do the AR, ER, and IR verbs in the present tense, it really opens up your world in Spanish in terms of being able to communicate. So enjoy speaking Spanish with these present tense verbs. That's it for this video. Hasta luego.